think we have everyone on board. So welcome and a very good morning, good afternoon to everyone. And thanks for joining us in this very important session discussing the facets of financing sanitation. A large financing gap has been identified as one of the greatest barriers to achieving water, sanitation, and hygiene related targets of the SDGs. Funds are not only needed to construct water, sanitation, and waste infrastructure, but also for the people and institutions to maintain and expand these services to a very growing population. It is estimated that population in certain countries would double by the year 2050, and it is utmost important to ensure that water and sanitation services are financed timely. The World Bank has estimated that to meet the targets of 6.2 and SDG 6.1 and 2 alone, a capital financing would need to be tripled to around US dollars 114 billion per annum. And the operating and maintenance costs would need to be considered in addition. In general, maintaining existing assets would require at least 1.5 times the amount needed to construct these materials. So today we will hear from 4 speakers on the cost of sanitation in 5 sample cities, strengthening the private sector, cross-subsidy models, and financing in Lusaka City, Zambia. So without further ado, let's go and hear the first speaker. Ousseynou has been working in the water and sanitation sector for more than 30 years with various international development organizations. And over the last 9 years, Ousseynou has been fully dedicated to the AFDB Water and Sanitation Department as a sanitation specialist. And since October 2020, he has been assigned the officer in charge for divisions within the sanitation department. So before joining the bank, Ousseynou has managed a consultancy firm in Dakar, Senegal. And over that period, he's extensively worked with several unilateral, bilateral, and multilateral organizations such as World Bank, UN Habitat, UNICEF, USAID, etc., in Africa and in Haiti as well. He has worked for 13 years in CREPA, now known as Water and Sanitation for Africa, a regional African organization promoting access to low-cost water, sanitation, and hygiene for peri-urban areas. So over to you, Ousseynou. We are looking forward to your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, my presentation is about strengthening private sector involvement for sustainable and inclusive access to fecal sludge services along its value chain. Yes, it will be presented through these 4 major items. The first one will be the description of the context, which will be followed by the objective of the intervention, then the pillars and the operational priorities. And I will conclude with some perspective in terms of findings. About the context, this project or initiative is part of the implementation of what we call the OSIF program. The OSIF program is the African Urban Sanitation Investment Fund program, which aimed to upscale lessons learned from an AFDB initiative from 2020 to 2017, which aimed to promote innovative urban sanitation approaches in terms of technology, governance, financing, etc. The OSIF objective is to mobilizing financing to contributing to meet the SDG targets in sanitation in urban Africa. It has 3 main pillars. The first one is the establishment of the investment fund, which aim to attract funding from traditional development partners and private sector. The second pillar of this OSIF program is related to the development of a pipeline of bankable citywide sanitation projects, which is about a comprehensive approach to prepare sustainable infrastructure project and promote promote investment financing. The third pillar is related to catalytic project support, with the objective to demonstrate business opportunities and potential for private sector in participating in investing in urban sanitation sector. Now, what the focus of this presentation will be related to a project that the sanitation utility in Côte d'Ivoire submitted to the bank, the African Development Bank, to enhance private sector involvement in service provision along the sanitation value chain. Indeed, in its 5th year strategic plan, ONAD, which is a sanitation utility, has developed a specific program which key pillars are: first, the development of fecal sludge treatment plants throughout the country, and mostly in the secondary towns and the capital city, which is Abidjan. The second pillar is related to sensitizing households and people for the adoption of and construction of standardized toilets. And last, the capacity building of the service providers. Actually, this program of this utility related to sanitation, on-site sanitation, is to develop 14 fecal sludge treatment plants throughout the countries and in the main cities, and also set up a guarantee fund to support the service provider, which is amounting today over $360,000. Now, what happened is that they have already built a first step, which was commissioned in 2017. And after 1 year operation and maintenance of this facility, they realized that the operation cost is higher compared to the flow of money they are receiving from fees paid by the collection operators. And the gap is about 80% of the operation cost. And the main reason is that the volume of fecal sludge transported and discharged into this plant is far less. It's about 40% of what have been exposed. So this small volume is due to the fact also that the collection system and disposal is not truly mastered and controlled, so that all septic tanks emptied should be, the volume should be transported into the fecal sludge treatment plant. The other thing is that you have also these informal emptiers, and due to the cost of do not use the services that are provided by these entrepreneurs. So we can imagine the objective now of the utility. Actually, the main objective is how to overcome this deficit of the operational cost of this the fecal sludge treatment plant, because as they have to develop several other plants, there is need to master or to take action in order to secure at least the operation cost for this infrastructure. That's why they developed a kind of project aiming at working on this particular issue of securing how to secure resources to cover the operation cost, at least of all these plants that they plan to develop throughout the cities in the country. Now, the intervention has two main pillars. The first one is enhancing private sector involvement, and the second one is promoting service demand and facilitating access to the poor mainly to these services. Now, the first pillar related to the enhancing private sector intervention along the value chain has four operational priorities, which are the following. The first one is a participatory review and or accommodation of the regulatory framework and tools to the targeted cities, urban cities. What I want to point out here, the toilet specifications, the fecal sludge collection license, because all the operators are to be licensed by the utility. But what is the truth is that out of Abidjan, which is the capital city, in the secondary cities, most of the existing operators are not yet licensed. And also the management tools contract between the utilities and the private sector that are that will operate these facilities. The second operational priority is related to the procurement and contracting of private sector to operate these FSTPs that are already built and commissioned. Today there is 3 units that have been completely built and commissioned. 2 of them are in operation now. The third is capacity improvement of fecal sludge collectors. And the last is, the last is related to regular participatory assessment of the services delivery. The second pillar is related to promotion of demand and facilitating access to services. The main priority under this pillar are related to the development and implementation of comprehensive communication plan in these targeted cities. And then development and management of IT platform, easing access to the various information on service delivery. It means regulations, tools, infrastructure specification in design, and standardized toilets and FSTPs and collection licenses. And last is the development of and promotion of financing tools, guarantee funds for fecal sludge collector, loans for private toilets, mostly for the poor. Now, these are the pillars. As I'm saying, it's just projects that have been launched last year. And right now we are processing the recruitment, the procurement of a technical assistant to support the implementation of this project and to support also the beneficiary, which is mainly the utility. Now, as it is related, related to the financing issue and challenges. In my view, if for operation and maintenance of these facilities, there is need to enhance the participation of the private sector to operate and maintain these facilities. We have already some successful examples in Senegal, in Togo, and also in Ghana, not far from Côte d'Ivoire. And I think what they seek to implement can refer also or take advantages to the lessons from this interesting initiative. Now, related to the investment, up to now, it's the public resources that are used to invest to build these facilities. But nevertheless, we can try to draw lessons in the solid waste management system. For instance, in Abidjan, for instance, the newly operating landfill has been, the investment have involved the private sector, and it is also operated by this private sector. In Morocco, also in Rabat, for instance, there is an interesting case where the private sector have been fully involved in the investment. In short, this is what I wanted to share with the participant of this FSM6. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Thanks a lot, Ousseynou, for this presentation. We will have a panel discussion after all the presenters have given their presentations. So please post your questions in the chat, and this would be discussed during the panel. The next to present would be Mwansa Nachula Mukuka from Lusaka Water. And Mwansa is an environmental engineer with over 9 years of experience in developing, managing, and implementing water and sanitation projects. She holds an MSc in environmental engineering and project management from Leeds University in the UK. Her career started as a peri-urban engineer under peri-urban department in Lusaka Water and Sewerage Company Limited. The PUD is a department that is dedicated solely to providing water and sanitation services with low-income areas in Lusaka, Zambia. She is currently the sanitation specialist under the Lusaka Sanitation Program, a Lusaka water supply and sanitation company initiative to improve access to safe and sustainable sanitation in Lusaka. Her area of focus under the program is to provide support in coordinating, planning, designing, and implementing programs that will scale up the provision of non-sewer sanitation services and facilitate the new delivery models and mechanisms for the entire sanitation service chain for the utility. Lusaka Water is one of the few companies that has changed its name from sewerage to sanitation to accommodate non-sewer sanitation services. So we're looking forward to hearing your presentation, Mwansa.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Mwansa Mukuka from Lusaka Water Supply and Sanitation Company. I'm the sanitation specialist under the Lusaka Sanitation Program, which is a program funded by various international financing institutions that includes the World Bank, African Development Bank, European Investment Bank, and KfW, as well as Bill and Melinda Gates. The presentation I'm going to give you today really looks at the financing angle with regards to the products and services that the Lusaka Sanitation Program is undertaking with regards to provision on and improving the wash sanitation status of the people of Lusaka. So just as a brief background, the Lusaka Sanitation Program, also known as the LSP, is aimed at improving access to safely managed sanitation and as supported by the various FIs, as I mentioned earlier. And we also have additional support from GIZ and Bill and Melinda Gates that really looks at ensuring that the efforts under the bigger components, which is the bigger financing, is complete, and ensuring that we translate the strong enabling environments and key successes into measurable improvements, especially with on-site sanitation and Faecal sludge management. Some of the interventions of the LSP includes the expansion and rehabilitation of the sewer network and treatment facilities, then the construction of improved household sanitation facilities and institutional toilets, as well as the FSM business, that is a new business for the utility. The LSP also looks at building capacity within the utility, which is the main thing. We want to ensure that the financing and also the products and services that will be developed under the project is actually adequately managed post the project. And so there's been a deliberate effort to ensure that capacity is built within the utility for all the products and the services that the project is offering to the various customers. In terms of the enabling environment, Lusaka has been, Zambia in whole has been in a very fortunate situation right now, because we've seen a lot of change with regards to especially non-sewer sanitation. Recently, we had our national regulator, National Water Supply and Sanitation Council, NOSCO, expand the mandate of all utilities. So utilities initially were water and storage, but now they're focusing on providing sanitation services. And then what we've also seen is the fact that we have the OSS and national guidelines and standards that the regulator as well as the Zambia Bureau of Standards are developing. So in terms of the financing angle, how did really the program as well as the utility look at upgrading and also ensuring that the household pay for the sanitation facilities? And also the key thing that was in the service delivery model was the fact that we needed to ensure that post the project, households are still able to construct these facilities, as well as the utility is able to actually subsidize in a way or offer a discount for the households to improve their sanitation facilities. We had to undertake a formative research that looks at the understanding the willingness of people to pay, and then we had to design for aspiration and also unnecessary emotions. What did we really think that would actually allow customers to pay for a facility that they already had? And then also try to use the various networks that we have in the communities to ensure that that word is spread along, and then our customers learn to actually understand and also prioritize in investing in sanitation. So in terms of, we had to carry out, like I mentioned, the formative study. We realized that if we frame our financing message around a discount, where we say that if a household is supposed to pay for a discount to construct a facility, we realized that 7% of the household actually said that they were willing to do that. And then we also framed our message with a legal obligation. Our Public Health Act provides for households to construct their facilities. And so when we ask households to say, if actually is your mandate and you're obliged to do this, can you construct? We had about 91%. And then in terms of the landlords looking at adding value to their households in terms of a good sanitation facility, we realized about 16 to 23% actually looked at that angle to say, once I improve my sanitation facility or my sanitation services, I get to have more people and my rentals increase. So in terms of household sanitation facilities that you're constructing, really the big thing about the facilities is the fact that the utilities focus more on the substructure, while the household pays for the superstructure. We're also trying to apply the framework of the COS because we're doing this on a citywide level, and we ensure that the designs that we put up in the communities look at the equitable angle, they are safe and also sustainable. Under the projects, we are constructing 5,500 households, and we have a discount, what we are calling a discount, to ensure that even if households learn that this is their responsibility to construct a facility. So the way we broke down in terms of our delivery model is the fact that the utility pays for the substructure, which is their interest, because it wants to prevent the groundwater pollution, but then the households, and from the formative research, it was very clear that the households' interest was what they see. So the household then pay for the superstructure. And this is how we did the breakdown for the construction of the facilities. So in terms of key performance indicators, where are we now? I mentioned the fact that, and I think our interest is really number 4, where we started the construction in 2019. We have a target of 5,500, and we've constructed 3,520 to date. This has demonstrated the fact that households are able to uptake the product that we are offering, but then also in terms of the financing angle, because we have provided leverage for households to actually pay over a period of 6 months and then construct upon them finishing the construction, the paying the 2,400, that has provided like enough room for them to understand. We are also hoping through the various network that this message is transmitted to the various other people in the community to see the need for them to construct. The messaging around this construction is basically framed around the health, that if you actually have a proper sanitation facility, you're actually providing good health to your families. But then also what was key was the fact that we needed to understand the financing appetite from the households. How do they actually pay for a facility? And then in terms of FSM on the empty remove and convey, the utility has entered into contracts with local service providers through performance-based contracts. And the way this performance-based contracts were designed was the fact that the utility is topping up to address the failures of pit empty market and provide affordable services. Previously, before the contracts were entered in, we had two community-based service providers, but with a lot of informal pit emptiers. And when we did our market assessments, we realized that the private operators who had the capacity to actually offer a more efficient and affordable service were not interested in emptying pit latrines. And so to ensure that we had a comprehensive and also attract the interest in them trying to empty the pit latrines in various households, we had to understand how much really is the cost for them to empty a facility. And then also what we tried to do was we had to understand what is the cost of an informal pit emptier that is emptying in the community, the cost they charge. And then from there, we actually had to set up a price based on the information that we had to ensure that, first of all, we undercut all the informal pit emptiers who actually proved to be more expensive. Then what we did to ensure that even if we're offering a subsidy under this project, we needed to ensure that households already understand that emptying is actually their role. We set a fixed price of $12.5 US dollars per cubic meter, and then we top up on the service for to the private operators on the service that they're offering. We sent out a tender to the private operators, and we have various tender prices that we receive that make a total unit per cubic meter. So in terms of also the key performance, really, what we have seen is the fact that our target is we need to empty households for 230 people. Right now, we are 94,320, which translates to almost like 45% after 9 months of operation. With this model, we're confident that we're able to actually meet the target. And then the key important factor is the fact that households are actually paying that fixed fee to the private operators for them to meet their targets month in and month out. So in terms of lessons learned, what we have seen and in terms of Lusaka is the fact that when designing subsidies, which is a key thing about financing in the wash sector, it's the fact that you need to address your market-specific opportunities and failures. It's good to learn from other areas, but I think it's essential that you understand the current environment that you have and design service models that fit your current scenario. And then also engaging the private sector has helped us to enable service delivery and ensure that we are offering an effective service. Also, what we have done, like I mentioned, is the fact that we have an offer of vision. The vision of the utility is to ensure that we provide adequate services for the people of Lusaka. But what we tried to do is we had to come up with a transitional period so that we have an opportunity to learn on the lessons that we have and then actually improve on some of the failures that we encounter. Stakeholder consultation is quite key, and especially in this case, I've mentioned the fact that we are subsidizing both the construction of the household toilets and pit emptying. But the one thing that we're also trying to do is to ensure that our regulator is engaged so that we introduce a surcharge on the water bills. That then helps us support the entire the products and services we are offering, and we ensure that even as we go to the community and post the project, there's continuation to how much the utility can subsidize on both the products and services. In our case, we will have to adjust the cost of the unit superstructure for the households to ensure that the utilities contributed reduces. And then in terms of emptying, we've actually managed to do that because when we started at almost $10, almost $11, but now we've increased to $12.5. So we are slowly increasing the cost of the households that they have to pay to service provider to ensure that in the next 5 years, the full cost is actually borne by the household. And then to support this transitional period, the utility looks to ensure that they have reinforced the surcharge that they're going to collect on the water bill to support the progression of these services in terms of construction as well as the household. And then also what we tried to do was also turn opportunities into challenges. The reason why we actually set the cost of emptying fees to $11.5 was the fact that during the cholera period, the government subsidized the cost of emptying, and we actually saw that households were able to respond. And so when we went back in the market as a utility, we tried to ride on that to ensure that there's already a behavior that was developed by the households. Then we ride on that to ensure that households are able to afford this fee, and then we slowly try to increase the cost of emptying to meet the full cost in regards to it emptying.
So thank you, Mwansa, for that insightful presentation from the Lusaka Sanitation Program. Next, we have Nicolas, who's the current General Manager at Pit Pumpers Limited, with more than 6 years of experience working with social enterprise organizations driven by a passion for tackling social problems to improve the environment and the communities. Nicolas oversees all the daily operations in Kigali, Rwanda. He's a powerful force in the workplace, and he uses his positive attitude and tireless energy to encourage others to work hard, transform the community, and succeed. In his free time, he'd like to spend time with his family or ride his bike. And today he will present about experiences from Kigali, Rwanda.
So, hi everyone. My name is Nicolas. I'm the General Manager at Pit Pumpers Limited. It's Pit Pumpers Limited, which is also known as Pit Vidula. It's a Kigali-based organization. We are presenting an internal consumption model for serving low-income households and institutional clients in Kigali. So about Pit Vidula, Pit Vidula is a sanitation logistic company which usually do a combined approach of service delivery, we do research and technology development. And we consider ourselves as a live laboratory because all the research that we do, the technology development, we test them in our already business setup. So up to now, we have emptied 2,768 pits. And last year, we served 898 customers. So we have 3 types of service delivery in Kigali based on the customer segment and volumetric of the truck. So we have a 5-ton truck, which usually a flatbed truck with barrels and portable vacuum pump. So we usually empty the pit latrine, put into the, usually with the portable pump, put into the barrels, and then use the manual labor to transport to where the truck is. So these trucks serve the 33% of the total customers in 2020. So the second category of our truck is a 10 cubic meter vacuum truck, which also usually have a trash barrel carrier. This truck usually served low and middle income households, and it served 39% of all customers in 2020. So the third category, which is a bigger truck now, usually a 20 cubic meter vacuum tanker, which usually serve business, which includes schools, churches, restaurants, refugee camps, all corporate business, and it served 29% of all customers. So the 20 cubic meter vacuum truck also serves as a transfer station because we want to cut the transportation to and from to the dump site with a small truck of 10 cubic meter, and the price of dumping is the same whether you have a 20 cubic meter or you have a 10 cubic meter. So one thing to note here is that the low income households is usually 75%. It's 75% of all our customers. So based on the analysis study which was done by our executive director Rachel on willingness to pay, it showed that there's a gap in low income willingness to pay and the cost of the service. So the problem is the low income households willingness to pay is only $24, while the cost of serving those households currently is 65 US dollars per household. So the solution which we came up with is setting up an internal price differentiation strategy to offset the cost for low-income households. So to do that, we came with the method of first determining the total cost of each type of the truck used, putting into consideration its maximum utility and also the cost relating to service, which include for the flatbed truck rental, consumables, labor, dumping fees, PPEs, pit evaluation. For the exhauster truck one, fuel, and the reason it's fuel and the flatbed is called the flatbed we rent, we don't own it. We renting. That's why there is a cost category of truck rental. And the cost for the flatbed truck serving a household was $65. For the exhauster truck one, which usually serve the low income and middle income household, it's $54. And the cost of serving business or corporate grant institutions is $79 as seen, after putting into consideration all the costs relating to serving them. So after we came up, we put together all those costs. We built a spreadsheet-based model, which incorporated clustering the toggles, where we can be able to toggle the individual customer. If the customer can be able to be clustered with another customer based on the community, we can be able to toggle the markup on costs, the distance between the community and the dump site, because each community are located on the different distance between them to the community. So we did put together a cost-based pricing based on all those costs relating for low income and also for the corporate clients. This is a screenshot of our financial model as built-in spreadsheet. So the results on that we're going to show in three different scenarios. In the scenario one, where the price is cost-based for each service. Scenario one is when we assume that each different type of truck with different customer segment is covering 100% of its cost. So as we saw, the flatbed, which usually serve the low income with 0% markup, the price per job is $65. For the exhauster truck one, which usually serve the low and middle income, which is also 10 cubic meters, with a markup of 20% on costs is 67. The price is 67. Now for the exhauster truck 2, which usually serve corporate or business, with the 21% markup on costs, is 100. And this 100 US dollars is the market price, where even our competitors or other service providers, this is the price for serving a business 20 cubic meter truck. So on the scenario 2 is when the business assumes some of the costs of low income households. So instead of now the business taking all the cost, we took the cost of pit evaluation, consumables, and PPE. So pit evaluation is the assessment that we usually do before we dispatch the team to do the empty. So when the business assumes this cost of pit evaluation, consumables, and PPEs for the low income household, the price for the low income household reduced to 60. For the exhauster truck for low and middle income, usually it reduced to 62 from 67. But now the corporate business, price increased to 122. So on the scenario 3, where now we are meeting the household's willingness to pay price of only $24 per job, and charging based on the income level. So the price for the serving business doubled from the market price of $100 to $200 a scene, still keeping the 21% markup on cost. So the flatbed, we assume we put assuming that the flatbed and ET1, all low income, they are paying the willingness to pay price of $24. So we had to come up with a way we can be able to make the corporate business pay double the market price of $100. So through talking to experts and through the design thinking model, we came up and after talking to our customers, after doing analysis on our competitors, how they offer their services, how we offer their services, putting everything into consideration, we came up with a premium service for the corporate, priced at $200. So currently, we are planning to launch this service by the end of this quarter. That's by the end of next month, end of quarter 2. We are planning to launch this service. And currently, what we have done, or what we are in the process of doing, we have done this. We have prepared some flyers. We are putting together some marketing teams through our call center. We are educating our current corporate business about the change of pricing, the benefit that they are going to do, and giving them the flyers to see for themselves. So we have started this, and we are looking forward to more what you are going to learn once we launch this corporate premium service.
So thank you, Nicolas, for the presentation on financing model from Vidula. Now we have our last presenter who would be discussing the cost of safe sanitation in different cities. Caroline Delaire is the Director for Technology and Innovation at the Acquire Institute, a nonprofit research and consulting organization committed to increasing the safe water and sanitation globally. Caroline coordinates research programs on water safety, management, and sanitation, including economic analysis, evaluations of technology and policies, and data science projects. She lives in Lyon, France, and supports a team located in Kenya, Uganda, and Ghana. So over to you, Caroline.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Caroline Delaire, and I am a researcher at the Acquire Institute. Acquire is an independent nonprofit research organization focused on WASH. And today I'll be presenting a piece of work that we conducted with funding from WSUP, Water and Sanitation for the Urban Poor, looking at the costs of urban sanitation and specifically achieving universal safe sanitation. So the context you're probably really familiar with. Sanitation conditions in most cities of low-income countries are currently insufficient, and it kind of gets worse as you go down the sanitation value chain. So a number of households do not yet have access to private adequate toilets. Pit emptying practices are often dangerous for service providers and for the environment. And finally, less than half of the waste in those cities is currently treated before disposal. So there is obviously a huge effort to be made to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal for sanitation, but it is difficult for municipalities and local governments to make decisions in the absence of robust cost information. And when I say cost, I mean the total cost. So the capital expenditures, but also then ongoing and maintenance cost. So our goal was thus to provide an estimate of the cost of achieving universal sanitation. But before that, it was really important to define the boundaries of what we were trying to cost. And in this study, we decided to focus on what we call the sanitation gap, which means all the needs that are currently not fulfilled. So this includes households that currently do not have access to adequate toilets. It also includes households that currently do not have adequate emptying services. And then it includes households that currently do not have, whose waste is currently not treated safely. For the first two categories, we chose to focus on low-income areas because we hypothesized that middle-income and high-income neighborhoods wouldn't need additional subsidies to achieve access to toilets and emptying, but that low-income areas would. So just to illustrate what we mean by the sanitation gap, so let's take the example of the city of Kisumu in Kenya, approximately 100,000 households. Among those, we have approximately 40,000 households that live in low-income areas and do not yet have good toilets. 50,000 that live in low-income areas and do not have adequate emptying services, and over 70,000 in the city as a whole whose waste is not currently safely managed. So that's what we call the gap. And what we tried to do in this study is to identify or estimate how much it will cost to serve all these people, to bridge the sanitation gap. So in our framework, we decided to break this cost into two components. First, a component focused on households. How much will it cost to subsidize, or how much is the subsidy required for all of the low-income area households to have access to adequate toilets and emptying services? So household subsidy on one hand, and on the other side, municipal infrastructure. So what is the cost of the municipal infrastructure required to transport and treat and dispose of the waste that is currently untreated? So again, we looked at costs in a comprehensive way, looking at initial investments, but also ongoing and maintenance. So CapEx, OpEx, and capital maintenance expenditures. So it's important to recognize that municipalities may consider a range of sanitation approaches. This includes on-site sanitation with emptying services. So we looked at several technologies: lined pits, vaults, which are smaller and have to be emptied more frequently, septic tanks, combined with two types of service providers for emptying: formal, professionalized manual emptiers that wear adequate protective equipment, and then the traditional vacuum truck operators. So that's for on-site sanitation as we normally think of it. We also looked at container-based sanitation, an approach that is gaining traction, at least in specific countries, so particularly Kenya and Ghana, where we worked. We looked at sewers as the most conventional approach still to date. And then we looked at a hybrid option between on-site and sewerage, which we called the mini sewer. And this corresponds to several household toilets being piped into a mega neighborhood level septic tank. So it doesn't connect to the main sewer, it connects to an on-site facility. But for the household, it's the convenience of sewage. Like they just flush it out and then it goes somewhere and they don't have to worry about it. So our methodology, briefly, we worked in 5 different cities: Kisumu, Nakuru, and Malindi in Kenya, Kumasi in Ghana, and Rangpur in Bangladesh. So our fieldwork consisted in 2 parts. First, we surveyed over 2,000 households in low-income areas to understand their willingness to pay for different sanitation products and services. We specifically spoke with homeowners and landlords that didn't not yet have adequate sanitation for themselves or their tenants. And then in parallel to that, we collected detailed cost information from households, service providers, masons, engineers, hardware stores, NGOs, and the goal was to really document how much it costs to build a toilet, provide emptying services, provide treatment, etc. So this study has been published, and so it's open access, so more details on it are available online. I'll just say a word about how we measure willingness to pay. So we use a method called the double bound dichotomous choice method. And what it means is that it's a series of 3 questions where we first ask the respondent if they would be willing to pay a random price. So let's say, are you willing to pay $20 US for one emptying job with a vacuum truck? If you say yes, if they say yes, you go up to $30. If they say no, you go down to $10. And that provides the bounds of what they might be willing to pay. And then you use a final question, what is the maximum amount you would be willing to pay? So you don't ask that third question immediately, you just go there through a series of questions that help the respondent think about their boundaries. And that helps derive what we call a demand curve on the right, which shows the proportion of respondents willing to pay a specific price. So it decreases as the price goes up. Okay, so let's look at the main conclusions. So here I'm showing you the cost of building one single toilet in a low-income area across the different study cities and across the different technologies we talked about. So this is the cost in US dollars, probably higher than you expected, $900 on average. Now let's compare that with what I just displayed in lighter blue, which is the willingness to pay of households in low-income areas of those cities. So we have average and then 20th percentile of willingness to pay. So what should strike you is the major difference between cost and willingness to pay, whatever sanitation option we're talking about in all the cities. And so what we used this gap between cost and willingness to pay to estimate the magnitude of the subsidy that would be required for these households to gain access. So it's a good order of magnitude. Now let's look at emptying services. So same story, whether we're looking at manual emptying or vacuum truck operators, we're still finding a gap between the cost of purchasing those services in the low-income areas of the study cities and what residents are willing to pay. Again, the difference is a good order of magnitude of the subsidy required. And same thing for container-based sanitation, which we looked at in 3 cities. So again, the same message across options, willingness to pay is much lower than market prices, whatever sanitation approach, technology or service you're considering, and the difference can be used to estimate the magnitude of the subsidies required. So now if we aggregate this up to a city, I showed initially the example of Kisumu with 40, 50,000 households currently lacking toilets or adequate emptying services. So if we aggregate this up at the city level and ask how much will it cost for Kisumu to provide enough subsidies for all its residents to gain access to to sanitation products and services in the next 10 years to achieve the SDG, this is what you get. So approximately $16 million in subsidies if you're looking at pit latrines with emptying, approximately the same volume of subsidies required if you're looking at sewerage. Again, we're talking about the household portion here. And then for container-based sanitation, we estimate a higher requirement for subsidies because willingness to pay, at least in our study, was quite low for this option. So that's the one part of the financial requirement, right? The how much you have to subsidize households so that they can even get access. But on top of that, of course, you have to add the municipal infrastructure, which has to be financed too, right? We need funding for that as well. So it's infrastructure to transport the waste, for example, in the case of sewerage, the piping, and then the treatment downstream. And so that's where you can start seeing something you might have guessed, which is that sewerage comes out as the most expensive option. Not so much because we need more household subsidies, it's similar to on-site pit latrines, but because the municipal infrastructure is so expensive. Okay, now let's look at a different city, Malindi, slightly different. We looked at slightly different options there because of the context. So you can see on this graphic our cost estimates for Malindi to achieve the SDG for sanitation. So one, using septic tanks, okay, 14 million total. Mini sewers, the option I described, which feels like a sewer for the household, but is not. And then conventional sewers, again, jumping through the roof. So I thought this comparison was interesting because mini sewers and sewers have a very different cost. Again, similar cost regarding the black portion, the household subsidy, but really different magnitudes in terms of municipal infrastructure. So very different cost, yet the convenience to the household is probably very similar. So it's something worth considering where the land constraints allow it. The mini sewer might be a good option. Okay, so I am going to wrap up here with three main take-home messages. Number one, I think you will have understood that safe sanitation, safe toilets, safe emptying services are not affordable to most of low-income area households currently. And therefore, achieving universal access to these products and services will require household subsidies. I think it's important to face it. And so it's now the study highlighted the magnitude of the subsidies required. I think future research should investigate the most efficient and effective ways of deploying these subsidies. Number two, sewerage was the most expensive approaches in the cities that we studied. And not so much, again, because of the household subsidy required, but because of the municipal infrastructure. And so many cities currently aspire to sewerage as their main strategy for achieving progress in sanitation. And I think it's important to caution that this is often the most expensive approach, and there may be alternatives at least in some parts of the city, which I've highlighted a promising one, which is the mini sewer. And then finally, I just want to point out that maybe one original part of this research was this idea of disaggregating cost, or disaggregating the financial requirements between the household subsidy portion and the municipal infrastructure portion. This might be helpful as we think about how to actually finance those requirements, because you may go very differently about how you'll finance one and the other. For example, the subsidy portion could be financed through a results-based type of funding mechanism, whereas the municipal infrastructure is probably going to get financed through loans, either commercial or not. So that I will leave it at that, and would be happy to take this further in the panel. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Caroline. I think we can go ahead and start the panel discussion, but I regret to inform you that one of our presenters, Nicolas, is unable to join us today. So all questions that were addressed to him would be communicated to him and would be posted on the comments page under the session on the website. So you could take a look at it later. Now, when we look at Ousseynou, you had mentioned, I think, guaranteed funds operated. Like, how is guarantee fund operated? And is it a grant or a soft loan that is provided to the FSM service providers? And what is the cost recovery mechanism for capital investments?
Thank you very much. Actually, in this specific case of Côte d'Ivoire, the guarantee fund has been put in place by the utility, the sanitation and drainage utility, which is called ONAD, since I think more than 2 years. But up to now, actually what is happening up to now is that this guarantee fund has been accessed only by few private operators based in the capital city, mostly, rather than those who are operating in other cities in the country. Nevertheless, this particular project that the African Development Bank is supporting, the main aim also is how to operate fully this guarantee fund and bring it accessible to the other private operators in other cities. And one of the objectives of this study, of this operation, this project is to address this issue. Now, what I can provide as a concrete example that is being used in other countries, like in Senegal, in Dakar, for instance, where the same strategy have been put in place. This guarantee fund has been put in a commercial bank, and the operators that are interested in accessing this guarantee fund has to apply directly with this bank, who is well known, is a development bank in Senegal. Yeah, this is the part, and I think it for this case, for more than 5 years, it is fully operational, and it is it has been characterized as a successful case. But some details, maybe for the how it operates, maybe I needs to there is need to reach out with owners in Senegal just to know exactly how it operates in details. But what I do know is, according to the communication that have been unveiled in several conferences, is that it is operating well. In a smaller case, in the case of Togo, for instance, there has been a project that have been completed 3 years ago, where in the same program that is supported by the African Development Bank, guarantee fund have been put in place just to support households that are in the poorest areas of city in Togo, which is Sokode. And these funds has been operated by small community businesses throughout the different subdivisions, sub-cities of this main city. It's a kind of soft loan, is what is called microcredit. And how this credit is accessed to this household. So there is a kind of, I would say, social engagement by each household who apply for a credit. You have to go to your related, how to say it, community-based enterprises that is operating. This is which is managing this fund through a microcredit bank. You have to go to apply with this community-based business or social business, and then with these small community-based enterprises, you have to go to the what we call the kind of traditional authority. You know, there it is not signing a paper doesn't matter, but the engagement vis-a-vis to this local authority is very key. And I have been surprised to see after 2 years that this arrangement is always operational, and additional households have access to toilets. through these microcredit system which is put in place. Related to the emptying services, I think it's the same arrangement. At the beginning of the project, when it was launched, there was a very participatory consultation with the communities, various associative, social communities that are existing in place to set all the criteria to access to the services against a price that have been defined. Of course, as said Caroline before, the full costs cannot be met. I think there is need to subsidy, for instance, to subsidy the truck acquisition, for instance, the new truck acquisition, for instance. But nevertheless, most of the operators are using second-hand, what is called used truck, which costs less, and so it can provide allowed to lower the cost of the services. But nevertheless, the issue with this kind of used truck is that, yes, over most of the time you have issues on mechanical issues that prevent service to be full-time available. That's the main issue. I think really that's what I can say vis-a-vis to that question. But it's true that it's in sanitation up to now it is very difficult, but it is possible. If, as I said in my presentation, if you draw lesson from what is, if you can provide contract in a very long time period, for instance, to an operator, this can be possible. But if not, it would be very difficult to meet the full cost. Thank you.
Thank you, Ousseynou. Now over to Mwansa. I have two questions for you. How much percentage of Lusaka is actually served by the private sector currently, and under the contract that the private sectors provide, is that a demand-based emptying, or is it a scheduled service that is planned?
Yeah, thank you very much for those questions. So to begin with, based on Lusaka is currently carrying out what we're calling a sanitation data just mapping that will give us very specific figures on really the number of pet latrines that we have. But currently we have an estimated figure of about 70% of the people living in Lusaka city who are actually using pit latrine for the sanitation as a sanitation facility. So to answer your question, the private operators are citywide, and so the assumption is they're serving close to the 70% of the people that are actually using the pit latrines. But like I said, come I think September this year, we'll be able to actually know the accurate figure of the number that has been served based on the sanitation database work that we are carrying out. And then in terms of, yes, currently the pit emptying is demand-based. And so what we did is we had to kind of consider a risk sharing between the utility as well as the private operators. So as a utility, we provided training for demand creation to the private operators, as well as initial materials to market the service. And then as part of the team of the private operators, they go in the various communities and create the demand based on Lusaka water.
Thank you, Mwansa. And Caroline, I see that you've been answering questions in the chat, but could you also brief us if a mix of technologies are used, do you think it would considerably reduce the cost, like using approaches like CWISE, where if you have a sewer that's already planned, to expand it would be cheaper than to bring in an FSM system in that particular area? So what do you think using a variety of approaches would do to find the cost of sanitation?
Thanks. That's a really good question. I do think that we should consider a mix of approaches. One thing our analysis did not consider is the geospatial characteristics of the study cities. I think that would be the next step. As you mentioned, in the city center where the sewer is already there, it might actually be most cost effective to just extend it to the neighboring low-income areas. But for the new low-income areas that are, out there, pretty sparse and further from the city center, I think that's where other options could be more valuable. Topography as well should be considered, where we can do gravity-based sewer systems that will be a lot cheaper than if you have to pump. Yeah, so in short, I do think there is opportunities to refine our cost estimates by bundling several approaches.
And was there any criteria when you selected these cities, or are these cities already under a subsidy program?
These cities were chosen because they were of interest to the funder, to be quite honest. Water and sanitation for the urban poor, those were their program areas. And so for each city, we considered the sanitation approaches that were currently being considered by the authorities. So for example, in Malindi, Kenya, we know that the municipality is planning to build a sewer, but we wanted to show the comparison with alternatives.
Thank you, Caroline. Now back to you, Ousseynou. I know that engaging private sector has always been difficult, but are there specific measures that are taken to motivate the fecal sludge collectors to bring the sludge to the treatment plant, or also are they provided with subsidies while purchasing equipment that is needed? And how is it with capacity building within the private sector? Has that been financed in the areas that you've discussed?
Actually, it is very tough to guarantee 100% of all fecal sludge collected, brought to the FDPs. Sometimes in the capital cities like Abidjan, it is easier because you have enough resources like the police stations or all these hygiene officers that are almost everywhere in all subsidies. But in inner cities, it's more difficult. It's more difficult, and the previous programs that tried to address these issues, like RASOP, for instance, in few years ago, doesn't succeed fully. But from my past experience, I think what is key is, instead of setting up rules or bylaws from top and trying to get it implemented by force in the field, we have to use very consultative and participatory approaches just to first to set up these rules. This has worked in some cities, but smaller cities. And also to have this kind of, I would say, engagement vis-a-vis to all stakeholders. This can work, but in smaller cities. As you can see, for instance, in Côte d'Ivoire, ONAD, which is the utility, doesn't have a representative in all these cities where it wants to build these facilities. So my view is that there is need to involve fully either these private entities, but also the municipalities, even if they are not fully responsible in operating and managing these facilities, as it is under the responsibility of the national utility. But my point of view is that there is need to use this at the early beginning, upfront, very participatory approach, so that everybody should know that what are the consequences of these bad behavior, if I can say so. And yes, involving also the community as, how to say it, just to oversee what is going on in the field, and also sometimes have to how to say in French, but maybe Caroline can help me to denounce some attitude that are not environmentally speaking correct. In some cities, the small cities, it could be possible, for instance, to involve or to involve the private sector, these private operators, in the operation and the maintenance of the FTPs under kind of, how to say it, under a operation and maintenance contract, to operate and maintain under a contract with the utility. This is my own experience, but according to what my own experience, even in main cities, we can see operators discharging in the sewer network, which is not correct. This can happen, and unfortunately, this is what is going on. For me, that's why in the one component of this project that we are trying to support is on communication. For me, it's key, communication, how to build, to raise awareness of all these stakeholders or people concerned by these particular services like fecal sludge management. Yeah, that's my what I can say related to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ousseynou. Caroline, would you like to comment on his answers?
No, thanks.
Oh, okay, thank you. So back to Mwansa. How is Lusaka exploring the possibility of treatment of fecal sludge and reuse, and would that kind of offset some financing costs? And also, are the households incentivized in some way to desludge? Is there any particular funds that are allocated for reaching low-income communities rather than the households having to bear the cost fully?
I think let me start with your last question, which is households incentivized.
Yeah.
Yes, like I mentioned, I think in the presentation, what we are currently doing in the case of first of all household toilets is households are only contributing to the cost of the superstructure and not the full cost of the facility. And then in terms of emptying as well, we had to, the price is shared between the private operator, which was determined through a bidding process, and then also a fixed fee from a household. So even that is subsidized and in terms of emptying. And the reason why we're subsidizing is we're really looking, after from the willing means to best study, we realized that households were quite restricted in terms of financing. But then also we're mindful of the fact that currently we have a project, and the project comes to an end, and still the need to provide safe sanitation as well as construct proper household sanitation facility will still be there. This is a reason why we had to design subsidies that we thought should be sustainable for the utility post project. Why I say this is because
Currently, the utilities actually has put up a business case to our regulator where we can we're trying to ensure that we ring-fence, we get a sanitation surcharge and then ring-fence so that we can continue to provide these products and services to the households. So this is the reason why we've had to subsidize, but then also be smart about how we actually subsidize our products and services to ensure that we are able to meet the larger population in a case where there's no additional financing coming to the utility to still provide the services. And then in terms of treatment plants, yes, so under the project, we are actually constructing 2 FSTPs that we also hope to see how best we can add value to the West and ensure that we raise some financing that could go around the operation and maintenance costs to ensure that that can mostly is for operation and maintenance costs and not really the cost of emptying. One other thing that I wanted to mention is the fact that, so this was Lusaka Water started carrying out spit emptying services as far back as 2012. And what we did, though, the price that actually the households are currently paying was higher than that was previously paid. Although in terms of the volume and also the impact and the number of people that actually access the services not as high as we are currently experiencing, there were lessons that we drew from this, the period that we undertook the emptying services to ensure that as the utility then fully, because the utility has now incorporated FSM business as part as FSM services as part of their business strategy, you have to be mindful of how then the utility sustains itself around the OM cost, as well as the staff that are actually working to ensure that the performance-based contracts are carried out accordingly. So that's something that we were mindful of as we designed the subsidies.
Thank you, Mwansa. Now over to Caroline on a suggestion from the chat was to convert the costs into the entire annual cost for a city, and then sort of split it into different tiers or different slabs into monthly costs, so that the cost would rather appear as individual sanitation fee or cess that needs to be paid by a household, for example, rather than estimating the cost for the entire city. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, so I'm guessing the suggestion is offering households the possibility to pay in installments over time as a monthly fee as opposed to one-off payments. Mm-hmm. We looked at that as well in our willingness to pay survey. We tried to know if people would be willing to pay more overall if this was broken down into several installments. And based on our willingness to pay survey, the answer was no, actually. It seemed that this would not tremendously increase their willingness to pay. Now, as I've mentioned in the chat, I think there is limitations to measuring willingness to pay with surveys. So it's possible that in reality it would raise a little bit. But if you remember the magnitude of the gap between the cost and what people can afford, even a marginal increase through installments is not going to cut it, right? I think we may reduce the need for subsidies, but not eliminate it.
Thank you, Caroline. And do you think that there's what is the feasibility period to provide subsidies for the services, and are there other financing mechanisms that are available?
Yeah, I saw a couple of questions regarding where the subsidies should come from and how long can we subsidize. Those are really good questions. So I want to highlight the innovative approach that Lusaka Water is using, which is that of cross subsidies, where richer customers of the utility pay a surcharge on their water bill to cross subsidize services, sanitation services in low income areas. So I think that's a really promising approach. In Kenya, we've actually done a feasibility and willingness to pay study for cross subsidies of this kind. And it was really encouraging to see that people were willing to pay a cross subsidy to support sanitation in low income areas. So that's one way, a direct cross subsidy. And more generally, I think we should consider another option could be results-based financing, which is trending up at the moment for the household portion of the subsidy models that are currently being tried, where like the government could receive donor funding if certain objectives are met. And I think this is like compatible with household-based subsidies. And then, but more generally, I think some people are resistant to the idea of saying, okay, we'll need to subsidize sanitation forever. I understand it doesn't sound very attractive, but it's good to remember that our services, like the sewers I have, are subsidized and probably forever. When I lived in Nairobi, the cost of sewer services to people living in my neighborhood were subsidized 50%, and nobody, raised their voice against that. So why shouldn't the services to the poor neighborhoods be subsidized?
Thank you, Caroline. I would love to keep the discussion flowing, but our 90 minutes is about to end soon. As a conclusion, I would request all the panel members to give a punchline on what is the most important aspect to consider when it comes to financing FSM services. Do you want to go first, Ousseynou?
Yeah, as I said in my, it depends what is considered. If it is about investment cost, capital cost, for instance, I think there is need to structure the service that is to be provided in a very longer terms contract, so that those who are to provide the services could access maybe in loans with lower interest, or can access easily to loans that could allow them to invest, like it is being done in the solid waste management case, for instance. But up to now in sanitation, it is not yet done. Most of the contract are maybe the longest is 5 years, or this cannot allow the private sector to invest, for instance, in infrastructure or in newly branded equipment. So in my view, there is need to structure the service and try to provide long-term contracts so that the private sector could invest. Related to the operational cost, I think, in my view, for toilets, it could be possible to reach a full, how to say it, cost recovery. But there is need for this case. But I don't think that it could be applicable in mega cities, but in smaller towns. When I say small, is like less than 100,000. Or yeah, it could be possible. But building also in our traditional law in brackets, if I can say so. Some experience have been being implemented and successfully like I said, in Togo. But it needs a very extensive participatory approach. The beneficiaries should be involved at the very early beginning, and bring them to outside to lead the process, or not thinking for them, but using their own ideas to build strategies and actions. This is my point of view related to the operational cost. And also we have to trust on these SMEs also for collection services, And yes, these, I would say, informal service providers, I'm thinking about these nations that are building toilets, these very informal private operators, how to engage with them so that they can be part of the process and try to be in a way be as formal as possible. But this need an extensive dialogue, very participatory approach with them. Thank you.
Thank you. So now to highlight the importance of private sector. So Mwansa, would you like to give a few concluding words on what do you think is the most important aspect of financing sanitation?
Yeah, I think one thing from my experience is just really we need to, especially for the private sector, they need to be incentivized. I think we all understand that, especially private sectors that are involved in providing sanitation in the low-income communities, they're really they're not as liquid as the bigger maybe private players that we have. So I think it's identifying the private sector, but then also understanding. I think research is very cutting, especially as the households, and also focusing on gender toilet human-centered designs, and then also trying to learn the markets that you have. For instance, something that we learned is the fact that households were able to pay for a service using a crisis and then utilize that to design your service model. So I think engagement, research, and then also be very flexible to pivot, especially when an idea or maybe an idea on activity does not work. I think the utility as well as other service providers need to be flexible. I think that's something I would like to stick on. Also, we need to be mindful of how sustainable even the subsidy that you're putting up has to be post, especially in a that's your utility or a service provider.
Thank you, Mwansa. And Caroline, do you have any last few words?
Yeah, thanks. I think I'll just end with a message for municipal decision makers who are currently preparing their sanitation master plans. So I would have two recommendations. The first one is try and build decision as much as possible on evidence. Don't make assumptions. I think it's important to estimate cost of different scenarios before committing to an approach. And secondly, when we're trying to look at the cost of sanitation and the funding or financing gap, don't forget the portion related to household subsidies. Don't just look at the municipal infrastructure. That the household infrastructure probably needs to be subsidized too. That will be all.
Wonderfully put, Caroline. So thank you everyone for joining the session. Like I mentioned before, the questions addressed to Nicolas would be posted on the comments in the FSM website in the session, just right below the session. So thank you for joining us once again and have a wonderful day.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.